Hey folks, thanks for watching. I am joined by the author of actually now two blog articles that have both really made my week. Um, he is a writer at Patheos on the Barrier Breaker blog. I want to welcome Martin Hughes. Martin, how are you, my friend?
Pretty good, pretty good.
A couple of days ago, you wrote an article for your blog on Patheos about about atheism and racism, specifically about a video that the Amazing Atheist made in response to a BuzzFeed video, and then you also wrote a follow-up to that after the Amazing Atheist made a response video to your first article. So I wanted to have you on and talk about it because I don't usually talk about other YouTubers, especially ones that are of the sort that you wrote your article about. But you touched on some very broad issues in your response to the Amazing Atheist. And I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about those broader issues and sort of the problems that people like him and their popularity sort of signify in the atheist community. So why don't we just get started with what was it that sort of drove you?
So there's a BuzzFeed video that said that was 24 questions for white people from black people. And then he made his response to a video made by some other black people who were like, here are 20 questions that BuzzFeed video, didn't ask.
Okay.
But yeah, but what made me do that? What made me respond to it?
Yeah, because I know in your article you said you almost didn't write the article. And then you wrote the article and it came across so powerfully. Like what was it that sort of what threw the switch in your head that made you think, okay, I've got to say something about this?
Yeah, there's been a lot of things that I haven't responded to in my blog simply because, I hesitate to, I'm a fairly small blog overall. Every once in a while I write something that gets a bunch of hits, but usually, it's pretty small blog. But I didn't want to write something that gave a blogger that I disagreed with a lot more publicity, right?
Right.
There's a whole thing of, okay, this is really racist or this is really sexist. But if I call out this person specifically, I'm going to give them more publicity. And so that's just like feeding into the reason why the Amazing Atheist, this video kind of, something I should respond to is I looked at it and I was like, holy crap, there are 470,000 views. And I saw the views before I saw the like bar. And I was like, you know what? He probably just got really downvoted on this. This is like, it didn't really hit me because I watched the video out of curiosity. It came on, there's that Pew Research poll that came out recently. And I was looking at some stuff on race on YouTube, and Amazing Atheist videos are rated pretty high. So somehow I clicked on it. I'm not subscribed to him or anything because I was like, oh, the Amazing Atheist says something. I want to see what he had to say. And so when I clicked on it, started watching it, I was like, surely people don't agree with this, even though all these people watched it. And then I looked at the like bar, and like 90% of people thought that it was an awesome video. And about 500,000 people had watched it. And most of those were probably atheists, knowing, the Amazing Atheist demographic.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, somebody needs to like address this racism in this video specifically. And my piddly blog is not going to, however many thousands more views he may get on his video from my blog isn't really going to, give him significantly more publicity than he's already getting. So I gotta say something, and so I did.
Yeah, it's we seem to view it very much the same way because I like I said at the beginning of our conversation, I don't, as a rule, talk about other YouTubers, especially other atheist YouTubers. I have talked about the atheist YouTube community in general,
right,
as being kind of a sewer, as being with a lot more sort of bad people than good people, unfortunately. Right. but I don't like to single people out for the reasons that you just mentioned, that you don't want to give people more publicity. As a general rule, I think it's better to ignore people like that and to just try to set a better example and provide an alternative.
Right.
And say, hey, if you want to watch an atheist on YouTube who isn't proudly toxic, maybe look over this way. I mean, I'm not perfect, but I make somewhat of an effort, and as do others as well. I mean, I'm not just putting myself up on a pedestal. There are, Aaron Ra is good, and Seth Andrews is a hero of mine, and Matt Dillahunty, and a lot of smaller YouTubers that I love as well, like Christy Winters and Foxy Jezebel, and just a whole bunch of awesome people that I would much rather be paid attention to than the likes of the Amazing Atheist.
Right.
But your article touches on something that is just so discouraging and so troubling about the atheist community, especially as it exists on YouTube, where I think the problems that are present in the broader community seem to get amplified, because sexism is a problem everywhere, not just in atheist circles. It's a problem everywhere. But it's even more of an apparent problem on YouTube. Racism is a problem everywhere, including in atheist communities. But it seems like it's even more of a problem on YouTube because it just gets amplified. And that's that. And there was a point in your first article where you said, this video of his at that point, I think, and you mentioned it had gotten like 400,000 views. And you said that's more people than attend the largest secular conference.
Yeah.
And that was the part that really kind of punched me. I was like, shit, he's right. Like, this is, because I went to my first conference last year because of the area of the country that I live in, most of the big conferences aren't near me, and I usually can't afford to travel to them to go to the conferences. But there was a conference that took place about an hour for me, kind of a larger regional conference. And I went there and it was like vacation. I mean, it was just wonderful. It was like going to visit your friend who lives in the nice neighborhood, and then you have to come back to your place in the shitty neighborhood. Right. So that part of your article really kind of hit home with me, where you pointed out, like, look at how many views this has. Look at how lopsided the like-dislike ratio is in favor of what this guy is saying. So clearly that bothers you as well.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think a lot of it is due to the demographic of the atheist community. Pew Research poll came out a few months ago, right? It was basically saying atheists are white, like overwhelmingly white, much more than the general population. Like, the general population is already white, but atheists is like something over 90%. It was enormous. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head. And of those white people, it's mostly male. So nearly all white and mostly male. That's your demographic. And if you look at, people may think that, I'm not saying this because I'm like just against white people. I'm saying, well, if you look at the Pew Research poll that just came out a couple days ago, that highlighted the disparities between white people and Black people in views of race. And it's like night and day. Black people say there's a major problem with race. Something like 75% of Black people were saying, yeah, discrimination is a problem in Black people's lives. And only 36% of white people agreed, which is like less than half. So if you're so along with the atheism comes a predominantly white demographic that doesn't really think racism is a thing. And so, if you're packaging along with your racism other messages, and you're trying to appeal to that crowd, things outside of just atheism, when you're appealing to a mostly white male crowd, saying this kind of stuff that the Amazing Atheist and other atheists kind of in his vein say will play well because of the demographic you're trying to appeal to. And this sounds really, really cynical, but I think they know that. And they know that that's going to get those views up. They know that, I think they probably know that with some of the stuff that, TJ is saying, and that I think kind of pushes the envelope a little bit farther than he would otherwise. Like, I think they kind of know that. I think they kind of know that's going to get people donating to the Patreon account and so on.
That's that's one of the things. That's one of the aspects of this I wanted us to discuss, because a few people that I talked to earlier today before we did this wanted me to ask you about that too. Like, and that's something that I sort of struggle with, because I agree with you. I definitely think there is an element of exploitation, you know, of giving the people what they want, you know. But how much of it is that, and how much of it is that this is how these people sincerely feel and sincerely believe, and to what degree does that even matter? You know, because it's easy to say, well, the Amazing Atheist or whoever is just telling his audience what he knows they want to hear, so that they'll boost his Patreon and boost his views, and he'll be able to continue his career. How much of it is that, and how much of it is this is actually what he feels and what he thinks?
Right. Yeah, it's hard to say. But I mean, I'm cynical about that. But on the other hand, like, you know, even if you're not, even if you're like, oh, he really believes this, I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, he's still saying racist stuff to hundreds of thousands of people. And he's nailing in these very damaging, I think, stereotypes of Black cultures, and these lies that, you know, we're making up the extent of discrimination in the United States. He's still spreading this around to about 500,000 people. I think his view count is over 500,000 now of that video. So at some point it's like, okay, maybe whether he believes it or not, you know, I'm kind of cynical about that. I suspect that he doesn't. He probably will insist that he does. So if he came back and did that, I mean, at the same time, he's spouting falsehoods, and he's nailing them into a disturbing number of people's, you know, voting minds. So that's disturbing.
Yeah, I my take on it has been for a long time, because I've not been a fan of his for years. I mean, I've told people that I thought he was racist and sexist and every other fucking thing for years,
Right.
and occasionally people would sort of make excuses and say, well, you know, and one of the excuses that people would sometimes make is, well, he probably doesn't really mean that. You know, he's trying to be provocative. He's trying to be edgy. You know, he's trying to do whatever. And my response to that was, well, so how does that make it any better?
Right.
So he's not really an asshole. He's pretending to be an asshole to get views, to get attention, to build an audience. How is that in any sense better than if he legitimately feels that way?
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I will admit that when I'm blogging, I use some pretty extreme language, but I try to use it accurately. Like, I'm like, okay, people aren't going to, because I'll just be dead honest. I want people to, when I have a point that I think is important, I want people to read it. And so when I write, sometimes I'll use a metaphor that I think is going to be, I think is going to catch people's eye, but I use it to, I use it because I think it's accurate. It's an engaging way to present something, and I use it because I think it's, you know, it's accurate. So I can understand, you know, I've seen some people comment that people like, for example, PZ Myers and others are using inflammatory language. And sometimes I think it's inflammatory. Sometimes I read it and I was like, well, they're just using metaphors to make their writing engaging.
Right.
And if you actually look at the truth of what they're saying, the metaphors fit. They're just like, you know, trying to make what they're saying engaging. TJ, I think, you know, he'll use metaphors, which I understand, but to some extent, like, his message itself is like very, very offensive and very disturbing. And so when you start, you know, changing the message, you're not just trying to be engaging, but you're trying to be purposefully inflammatory and, you know, changing the message to things that you may not actually believe. I think that's somewhat disturbing. And if he actually does believe it, if he actually does stand by it, you know, that's disturbing as well, I guess.
Yeah, well, because there are so many facts to sort of make the other case. You know, I mean, I know one of the things that you responded to in your first article was the uh, assertion that, well, it's not racist to say that black people commit more crimes, or, you know, the disparities in the criminal justice system, the racial disparities, which are undeniable. I don't know anybody who denies that those racial disparities exist, but people try to say, well, it's not racism because, well, black people just commit more crimes, as though that's just a natural thing. You know, like there's just something inherently more criminal about black folks, and that's okay. You know,
I think that's something interesting too, because people are like, I get into this conversation, and it's true. I mean, if you look at the statistics, because I encourage people, because a lot of people think that I'm just saying stuff because I'm black or because I'm a social justice warrior or something or whatever. So I encourage people to actually like just don't just take my look for it. Go ahead and look at the stats. And if you look at the stats, one of the things you will find is that, you know, black people are, especially black men, are convicted of crime at higher rates. I mean, that's in the data. So I'll openly admit that. But then there's also there's a context in which that has to be understood that I think is too often missed.
Well, yeah, that was another thing that sort of like a light bulb went off in my head when I was reading your article, because just coincidentally, your first article, was published on the same day as I put up a video about white supremacy.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know, right? Serendipity, right? And so that was, I mean, I thought that, I was like, oh, this is a really cool coincidence, you know, cool in the worst way. Like we both happened to be talking about the same awful topic on the same day. But in that video, for my research for that video, one of the things I looked up was the criminal justice statistics, and the thing that gives the lie to that suggestion that, well, black people just commit more crime and that explains everything, is that those disparities exist not only in crimes committed, but in conviction rates and in severity of punishment. So it's not just that black folks commit more crimes and that's why they get arrested more often, and that's why there are more black folks in prison than in the general population. It's that when they are arrested, they're convicted more often than white folks. When they're convicted, they get harsher sentences than white folks. And when they get out of prison, they have a much harder time getting their life back, finding work, etc., than white folks do. So these disparities exist down the line. You can't just say, well, you know, black folks bring it on themselves because they commit more crimes. That's just complete horseshit.
And I would add to that, in my blog, I had links to like actual studies, not just a ranting YouTuber who calls himself amazing, but like actual studies that say that, you know, black people are behind black people are discriminated against when it comes to medical care, when it comes to law enforcement, as we were just talking about in the justice system, but also just when it comes to like, you know, social environments, when it comes to employment. Black people are consistently, like every study ever, like in the United States, like actual people who have studied this seriously say, yeah, black people are discriminated against. And they're discriminated against from a very young age too, all the way back to like, there is the Department of Justice came out with a study about a year ago saying, it goes back as far as preschool, like the rates at which people are suspended. So you grow up in this environment, you experience it all your life. And the people who are suspended, because black preschoolers are suspended at a significantly higher rate than, you know, white preschoolers, even if it's for the same offenses, the rate at which you're suspended is going to increase the rate at which is directly connected to dropout rates, which is directly connected to poverty and crime. Like there is a huge context. What infuriates me, I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent.
No, go for it.
Like, what infuriates me about this whole thing is his attitude towards gentrification, and his attitude towards black communities. Instead of the solution being, okay, let's go in these black communities and let's improve medical care so that that's fair. Let's make sure that employment is fair. Let's make sure that the justice is fair. Let's make sure that law enforcement is fair. Instead of like trying to look at the actual problems that exist and that's causing a lot of issues and trying to fix those, which a lot of Black people are trying to fight for, and a lot of white people say isn't necessary if you believe the latest Pew Research poll. Instead of doing that, he was like, well, it's awesome that they go into these places and they decide to kick the Black people out of their homes and decide to build apartments and shopping malls and so on over that. Like, even the worst case scenario, which has been going on since the 1950s, well documented, of gentrification in these Black communities. He's like, yeah, it's awesome. And if they're homeless, once they get kicked out, they're homeless. Like, awesome. I have a nice shopping mall to go to, and I don't care. Like, for one thing, it's very selfish, and you can be selfish, just admit that you're racist on top of it. And for the second thing, it's like, it's not solving the problem of crime.
No.
You think that kicking Black people out of their homes due to gentrification and making them, one step closer to homelessness is going to suddenly, if poverty really is a problem, suddenly going to take away the poverty and thereby decrease the rate at which crime is committed? If you really think that's the issue, it just exacerbates the problem. So you're like actually making racism worse. It's not only heartless, it's deeply damaging to Black communities and to, the United States in general, because, we're one country, we're all connected.
Yeah. I can imagine how enraged you are by it. I know I get angry about it when I think about it too, because I don't understand how anybody could be okay with that kind of gentrification, where people, because I think a lot of people who say things like the Amazing Atheist said, who just sort of toss it off and say, well, there's less crime and it's a nicer neighborhood now, what's so wrong with that? They either don't realize, or they just flat out don't care, that a lot of that gentrification, a lot of those people who are being forced to move out of their neighborhood, in many cases are homeowners who are forced to leave their homes that they own.
Exactly, yeah.
Because they can't afford the property tax anymore, because the property values have gone up, and they may have lived there and been homeowners for, 20 years, and they have to leave even though it's their house because they can't afford to stay there because the property taxes are too expensive. And how anybody can say that's okay is beyond me.
But then there's also, condemning houses and moving people out of those for documented racist reasons. The study that the Economic Institute did, there's a study the Economic Institute did that basically was trying to diagnose the problems that were going on in Ferguson, right? And I was researching this for my last blog post, and they traced it back to the 1950s of people being like, councils pointing out Black spots as condemned and just moving people out. And then the people who, were protesting, why did my place get condemned? The council didn't really have to answer to them. It's just like, well, you're condemned. Now we're going to build a park there for, a nice white neighborhood. I don't know. It's just, but his response to that is like, I think a quote in his video that was responding to me was something along the lines of, because I said, he's happy when gentrification happens. And he responded, that's completely wrong. That's completely false. I don't go through Black neighborhoods, Black slums. And when I drive through Black slums, I'm not like, man, I wish there was a Starbucks here. I'm not like that. I'm just not sad when it happens. And then he moves on to his
that's better. That's so much better.
Like, you just proved my point.
Yeah, I don't actively inflict pain on other people. I just don't care if other people are in pain.
I just don't mind that much if they're in pain.
Why is it that in the atheist community, we can see oppression and marginalization of atheists because of their atheism so easily.
Right.
And we are so quick to be outraged about that. But then we are so, in many cases, I think, willfully blind to the same thing happening to people because they fall into other categories, because they are racially oppressed or oppressed because of their gender or their sexual orientation or whatever. Why are we so keen to, we're all about social justice. Even the people who are like all the anti-SJW stuff, they're all about social justice as long as the people that are being advocated for are atheists. But anything else, oh, that's just SJW stuff.
I think TJ really answered that question for himself. I think what TJ said, what the Amazing Atheist or whatever said, was that he's selfish, right? Mm-hmm. And he actually made this analogy. He was like, racism against Black people is not my problem. And he kind of said that atheism was, he kind of contradicted himself in the second video, but whatever. He kind of said that atheism was his problem, or he indicated that. And so he's going to fight for equality for atheist groups. But Black people weren't his problem. And yeah, he might do some stuff every once in a while that fights against racism, but it's not like his big project. It's not his problem, simply because, and to some extent, I have a limited understanding of that. I am not, I'm part of a couple marginalized groups, but I'm not part of a lot of other marginalized groups out there. Mm-hmm. So because of that, I don't fight quite as hard for example, Hispanic rights as I do for Black rights, because I'm Black and this is my experience and I know it. However, at the same time, I'm not going to go onto YouTube and say racist stuff against Hispanics, because that is all of a sudden showing that I care. I just care about being racist towards them. So the problem with the Amazing Atheist, and is not so much that he just said he doesn't care, is that when he cares about propagating a racist view. And I also think that in a way too, the reason why people may spread those racist views is, to more directly answer your question, I guess, the reason why people may spread those racist views is because they don't think it's connected to them, when in fact it really is. The way that you see Black people, for example, is going to impact the results you're going to get, right? Yeah. I mean, for example, like Obama is an awesome president, right? I mean, maybe in some ways, there's some things that are, but he's better than Romney, right? We'll give him that.
I think we could agree on that.
Yeah, he's probably better than McCain or Sarah Palin.
Don't get me started on an Obama love fest, or we really will be here all night. But anyway,
but that would not have happened. We would not have had Obama as president if we were still stuck into racism of the 1960s. Right. So actually having an accurate picture of Black people and other races in this country and giving them a shot to succeed, in that case, and in a lot of other cases, can actually translate into real benefits for the United States. And so if you want a better world, and not doing that is going to, as we've seen, increase poverty, which is going to, have a lot of detrimental effects to our general society. So fighting against racism, I think, is in all of our best interest. Is for the next generation's best interest, regardless of what race you are. So that we have an accurate picture of society that then we can then work towards improving as well as we possibly can. But I think a lot of people think that, okay, racism is something that only hurts them and it doesn't hurt us. And that's false thinking.
Well, and not only that, it's racist thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking of racism as something that is somebody, well, that's the racism, that's a Black problem. That's kind of a racist thing to say.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you made a good point when you say like, if the excuse is, well, I'm an atheist activist, not a black civil rights activist, you know, that's fine if that's what you want your focus to be. But then
Right.
why are you opening your mouth about black rights? Just don't talk about it.
Right.
You know, I
Or
mean,
give
if that's
somebody
not,
else the mic who
yeah,
actually does know a lot about it and does want
exactly.
to represent it. Yeah.
I know because I've done videos in the past about the problem with anti-feminism in the atheist circles, which
Right.
the Amazing Atheist is also a huge part of. Uh,
Mhm.
and and one of the responses I often get from people who disagree with me is, "We don't all have to be feminists,"
Mhm.
which is fine. I never said that everybody has to be feminists.
Right.
But if feminism isn't your thing, just shut up. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about. Don't, if feminism isn't your thing, then don't make videos talking about how feminism is cancer.
I mean, in a way, it's kind of a cop out because it's almost as if you can make the racist argument, right?
Yeah,
And if somebody else can come around and say, well, actually you're racist, or you can make the anti-feminist argument, and somebody can say, well, your anti-feminism or your racism is wrong. This is the way that things actually are. And at any point you can just cop out of it and say, that's not my problem, instead of
yeah.
actually admitting that you're wrong or that you need to listen more or something along those lines. It's like, if you're going to be involved in the conversation, be involved in the conversation. Don't use that as a card to cop out whenever the going gets tough and you have to maybe change your mind on something.
And I know a lesson that I've learned as someone who is usually like one of the privileged people when
Uh,
I'm engaging with these sorts of issues is to learn that um, it's almost never your job to sit in judgment, you know, over people who are actually in the marginalized group. And like for instance, with something like Black Lives Matter, where even I know some of the things that Black Lives Matter do, even amongst other Black civil rights activists, sometimes people say, well, maybe that's not the most productive thing. But the point I got to as a white person was, it's not their job to convince me. You know, it's not their job. I'm not the one who has to clear what they should and shouldn't be doing as they fight their oppression and they advocate for their rights. You know, it's not. I'm. If I do anything, I should be standing beside them or standing behind them and lending them my support. It's not my job to dictate it to them because I
right.
don't understand it. You know, they understand it.
I'm just thinking about all the times as an atheist that I have had to listen to Christians give me advice on how to on atheisting. Like, the way you're supposed to be an atheist, you can't be angry about this or about
Yeah.
that. If you really want to appeal to Christians, you're going to have to do this, or you're going to have to talk like this and all that. And thinking about it, a lot of times it seems like they don't really understand exactly where my position is. They don't understand how I can be so upset at something that I think there are legitimate reasons to be upset about. So that's really disturbing, and I let them know. But at the same time, I will admit that every once in a while they give me a point that I haven't really thought about before, or they tell me something about the way my atheism is coming across to them that gives me a little bit of pause. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's something to think about.
Yeah.
And maybe that might tweak my approach a little bit. So I think that there's a conversation that goes on. But by and large, I've noticed that the dominant group is too much in that teaching role with the marginalized group, and needs to listen a bit more.
Yeah. Well, and people, I hear people say a lot, often like my fellow white folks will say, well, I would be on their side, or I'm on their side, but, you know, I don't like it when they do this, or I don't like it when they do that. Or, you know, if they just weren't so angry.
I appreciate honesty.
Right.
I have friends on my, Facebook list or whatever who are racist. But I appreciate them when they're honest about their racism, because then we can have like a dialogue, and we can talk back and forth, versus them just like agreeing with me to agree with me, simply because they look at the color of my skin and they're like, okay, I have to agree with you.
Right.
Well, so to some extent, I appreciate if, to the extent that the Amazing Atheist was honest with, I appreciate knowing what he really thinks, even if I don't like the effect of what he really thinks. I appreciate knowing that what he really thinks. I appreciate people talking to my face as opposed to talking behind my back. Or I appreciate people admitting their racism as opposed to concealing it and having it come out in who they're hiring or who they're voting for, that type of thing. Because then it's actually out in the open and we can deal with it. So on the one hand, but that doesn't mean, the reason, my appreciation of that does not mean that I have to be okay with what they say. And it doesn't mean also that I can't react strongly, because sometimes I do, simply because, one, that's the way that I really feel, and two, acting strongly, I think, is part of the message. Like what you said was not just slightly offensive, it was way off the pale. So to let them know that. But like, yeah, I think that there's something so if they do decide, but I do think the good endpoint is to realize that you're not in my position, right? And to give me that respect. So even if that's not honestly what you think, I appreciate to some extent, even though I strongly disagree with it, and I'll express that, you telling me, that you don't think that I should have the podium to some extent. But the end result of it, the ideal, is for you to realize that I know more about my condition, on the average than you do, and to give me that. So there is like a convincing thing there, but there's like a final point, if that makes sense.
No, I think that makes sense. It would be nice if more people who are honest about their racism,
right. Actually,
were aware that that's what they were being. I mean, I think the thing that troubles me about it is I completely see what you're saying, and you're saying like, well, at least he's being open. At least now the whole world can see what a racist he is. I completely agree with that.
And we can actually deal with his view. I can deal with his view directly as opposed to it being hidden. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which I mean, it's sort of like the Donald Trump phenomenon.
Yeah.
Like that's the only reason I can think of why the Republican establishment is upset about Donald Trump, because with him, it's out in the open. Right. With the rest of them, it's undercover. They just sort of imply it. They use dog whistle terms, but with Trump, it's like, boom, racist, sexist, everything.
Right.
But the problem with Trump, and the problem with people like the Amazing Atheist, is they don't think of themselves as racist. So in a sense, they're not being honest. They're being honest to the point where they're letting it all hang out, and they're saying all these, unbelievably racist things, and then entrenching and making all these racist arguments to defend the racist things they're saying. But their defenses aren't what I said was racist and I'm completely justified in being racist. Their defense is what I said wasn't racist.
Right.
So and that's a really difficult wall to get through, I think.
It's just a lack of empathy. You just have to care. And this is going to sound like, I don't know how many people are going to, like, some people watching this may think that this sounds like, kind of begging people, please care about me. But like, at the same time, like, there's a certain amount, like, if we're going to engage in the conversation, it helps to be a little bit empathetic about the other person's situation. And so if your attitude is, yeah, I like kicking people of your skin tone I like kicking black people out of black communities, and I don't care.
Yeah.
It's very hard to have, it makes it a lot more difficult to have a conversation, because I'm having a conversation, I'm trying to some extent, like, empathize with you, you're trying to empathize with me, we're trying to come to some sort of understanding. But when you block that by saying, I don't care, when you try not to see things from my point of view, when you fail to realize that, you don't have my same experiences, then that is that's kind of, a major barrier.
And, as you pointed out during our conversation and also in your articles about it, I mean, it's not as if you were talking to a friend of yours, who said something kind of racially troubling, and you brought it up to him and he said,
Yeah, exactly.
"Oh, I don't care. It's not my problem." We're talking about a person who chose of his own accord to make videos that he then posted on his YouTube channel for his audience of hundreds of thousands of people, talking about how he doesn't care about problems that affect Black people, and a whole slew of other incredibly racist opinions that he chose to share with everybody. I think there's a big difference there too.
Yeah, you're right.
But anyway, I guess we can wrap it up. I really appreciate you doing this. I really appreciate us having this conversation. I was saying before we got started that you won me over, not just for your articles on atheism and racism that we've been talking about, but you wrote an article the day before your first article about the Amazing Atheist's video about how sometimes you wish there was a heaven. Right. And not only is that something I can completely relate to, because heaven, the wish for heaven was like the last bit of my theism to fall. You know what I mean? Like that was the thing I held on to for longer than anything, because I really, and everything you wrote about in that article, like the believing in a place where the wrong things can be put right and where the injustices can be sort of smoothed over and you can see your family and friends again, and everybody's just okay, everything's going to be okay.
That'd be awesome, huh?
That's such a powerful belief, and I wished for that so hard, and I still do. I mean, I can't say that I believe that it's going to happen, but I wish that it would happen. But not only did you write that article, and which I thought was excellent and could really resonated with me, but you opened it with a quote from the song Superman, "It's Not Easy" by Five for Fighting, which, as if people, it's blocked by my microphone, but I'm wearing my Superman t-shirt right now. One of several Superman t-shirts, and I love that song. And so you had me at that. So anyway, I will link in the description of this video to those of you watching. If by chance you're watching this and you haven't read Martin's articles on the subjects we've been talking about, they're linked in the description of this video. I highly encourage you to read those if you haven't, and to read his excellent blog just in general. So Martin, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.